Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and welcome back to my creative space. First and foremost, Happy New Year to everybody who is watching this video. I thank you so much for joining me as we chat about my favorite books of 2024. Let's start with the honorable mentions. I have 4 on my honorable mentions. I won't go too in depth with them, but the first one that I wanted to talk about is The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. This book is a sort of murder mystery in a fantasy world, and it definitely was one that really solidified my love for a murder mystery in a fantasy setting, and it kind of tumbled into me looking and seeking more murder mysteries in my reads for 2024. The next honorable mention is going to be Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This one is a short novella horror about this young woman who is starting over her life, and she kind of gets involved with this other woman and she's starting to gain romantic feelings, and it's so much of a story of self-discovery as well as a creeping horror, and this one was definitely my gateway to the horror genre, which I had kind of dabbled into, but it really opened the floodgates for me being more comfortable with reading horror this year. The third book that I'm going to mention is Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage. Lila Sage is definitely an author that really opened me up to cowboy romance, and her books were such an amazing palate cleanser this year for me, and Lost and Lassoed really resonated with the trials and tribulations that our main character Teddy is going through. I just felt so seen and so comforted with this book. And the last honorable mention that I have a physical copy of, and that is Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. This book had me in a chokehold, and once I finished it, I could not stop thinking about reading the next book. It is such a popcorn read for me, and there are so many different relational dynamics that is covered in Magnolia Parks, and it was just a drama that I was unsure of, but once I really got my footing in this book, it was something that I really enjoyed, and that really took me by surprise. For my favorite audiobook this year, it's going to definitely have to go to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This was a book that I think was so incredibly enhanced by my audio experience. There were elements where she would be talking on the phone and you could hear someone like through the receiver, and the sort of audio experience of that really built to this very creeping mystery and investigation that our main character Pip goes through. And I don't think I would have enjoyed the book as greatly if I did not read it via audio. And if you've not read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, I highly suggest that you try it out via audio, since it was such an amazing and fun experience for me. And for my manga highlight this year, it has to go without a doubt to Yakuza's Fiancé. This one was something that my friend Michelle told me to pick up, and I was a little apprehensive because I'd never read like Yakuza kind of story, and this one kind of has a romance to it, but there was something that kind of was a little off-putting because it's quite a toxic storyline, so I was like, I'm not sure. And then I picked up the first volume, and then I completely binged all the volumes that had been out at the time that I had read it. It has oddly become like this comfort series to me. I really love the dynamic character aspects and the way the world is built. It is in modern day Japan, so it's not too hard to get a grasp of this sort of mafia gang lifestyle that the two main characters live in, but I just really loved our main character Yoshino, and seeing how dynamic of a character she is, and seeing how she just adapts to the out of this world and like truly unhinged nature that she's in, obviously being in a Yakuza family. It was filled with quite intense plots, I will say, but there's something that was also so comedic about the way it was told, and I just really enjoyed the art style of this book. It was just incredible for me, and it was something that I read at the very perfect time that I had read it, because I was going through what I felt like a reading slump, and this really revived my reading time. And also, if you're not someone who likes to read manga, this also was adapted into animation towards the fourth quarter of 2024. So I highly suggest that you pick up Yakuza's Fiancé and just see it's for you. It's definitely an unhinged, like, not wholesome type of thing, but oddly enough, it worked for me. So we are going to get to the meat of this video, and we're going to talk about my top 10 favorites of the year. This is in like order from like my favorite and like my most favorite. I will go ahead and start with the first book, number 10, which is Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. This book was suggested to me by one of my friends who had read it and loved it. It was one of her favorites from 2023, I believe. And this book is a romance where we are following older protagonists, which I really enjoyed and I hadn't really read before. And also one of our characters is demisexual, which I also had not read before in romance. And I really enjoyed seeing our character kind of discover their sexuality at a much later age, and it felt so warm and so comforting for me to see this experience on page. There is a slight conflict, again, with one of our characters who is like discovering his sexuality, but I think the way the conflict was handled was really well done, and I think just overall it was a perfect romance for me, and one that I am so happy that I read this year. Book number 9 is from an author that I love and who really got me back into reading in 2021. I read her YA series and just fell head over heels with her character work. And this year she published a book back into that world, and that book is Air by Saba Tahir. This book is kind of a follow-up of the Ember and the Ashes quartet. This is going to be a duology, and we follow relatives of some of our characters from the Ember quartet. Just being back with Saba Tahir's character work was so nostalgic for me, even though 2021 was like, what, 3 years ago? The feeling this book gave me was the same way I felt when I'd first read Ember and the Ashes. And in this one, we follow 3 character perspectives, and we are just seeing the aftermath of what the world looks like after the conclusion of Ember. There are some twists and turns in this book that like really truly shocked me and brought me, like, had my jaw on the floor, to be honest. And Saba Tahir is definitely an author that I just love getting back into the world that she's created and getting to be with the characters. She always has a very emotional pull on me, and it definitely had to be a book that I put in my top 10 this year. And coming at book number 8 is going to be The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. This book was something that I had picked up for a kind of project that I did on my channel where I read some of my favorite booktubers' favorites. And this was a favorite of Stephanie from Stephanie Bookish. And one of the big buzzwords in this for me was found family. That is an element to stories that I really, really love. And this basically follows one of our main characters who is kind of cast into taking care of this young boy who is nonverbal. And she doesn't really know why she has to take care of this child. She just knows that he has some sort of ability that needs to be kept safe for the specific scientist to study later on in his life. She is an older woman who kind of is unsure of her place in life, as she is this sort of cargo woman, and every single time she goes back into her home planet, she sees everybody she knows age, where she, due to like the effects of her jumping from different planets, she has kind of slowly aged. Like, she hasn't aged at the normal rate that people she knows have been. And so she's kind of struggling with her place in the world and like what her relationships mean. And when this young boy comes into her life, she really starts questioning like where she's meant to be and what her purpose is. And the way Simon Jimenez writes, it's not that they necessarily write in these big metaphors, but the simplicity of Simon Jimenez's writing really hits home, and the way he creates the dynamics between the characters was something that like I was reading and then suddenly I had to stop and be like, wow, Simon Jimenez punched me in the gut. And I didn't even know that they were going to punch me in the gut. But then I had to reread certain sentences and be like, that was such a simple way to put somebody's grief, and seeing somebody else experience that and talk about seeing someone experience that was put so simply, but it impacted me so deeply that I was just like, Stephanie, if you're watching this, thank you so much for recommending this to me. And it was a book that when I think about it, I kind of want to cry a little bit. Just a little, just a teeny tiny bit. And the emotion packed in this almost 400-page book was so stunning and beautifully done. I really loved Simon Jimenez's writing, and I can't wait to read more books from this author. And speaking of found family, number 7 on this list is Vera Wang's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. This one is a silly, goofy, cozy murder mystery where we follow an older protagonist, Vera Wang, who owns this tea shop, and one day when she wakes up, she goes downstairs to see a dead body in the floor of her tea shop, and she's like, oh, well, I've watched CSI, I've watched, all the murder channels, I know what to do. So she calls the cops, she preps the crime scene like she's seen in those shows, and the cops arrive and they're like, he wasn't murdered. It was an accident. Case closed. And she's like, no, nobody just comes into some random old woman's tea shop and accidentally dies. This is a murder. So she ends up taking it into her own hands and deciding that she is going to find people she thinks is suspect of killing this man. And subsequently, she ends up building a found family with the people she suspects of being murderers. And it is oddly so cozy, despite the fact that, like, this poor old woman found a dead body in, like, the place she works and lives in. But just the way she scoops up these people and she sees them, and a lot of these people have not felt seen in so much of their life. And it's just so silly because she sees these people and she's like, despite me suspecting you of being a murderer, I still see so much good in you, and I see so much potential in the things that you love. And she nurtures these people in a way that people who've known them all their lives have not. And it was something so healing to read on page, this like very grandmotherly figure who also needs to be seen. Like, just their found family was so amazing to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, not this book that I thought was going to be silly goofy hitting me in the feelings. It was such an amazing book, and I am so excited for the sequel to this series to come out and be around the found family again. And number 6 is going to be We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer. This book is a very strange out-of-body experience. I read it via audio, and the basic premise is that this couple, Eve and Charlie, end up buying this home that they found like on sale very cheap, but it's like a huge home in the mountains, and Eve's girlfriend Charlie is like a house flipper, and so they're kind of like not that great in financial standing, and Charlie's like, we're going to buy this house, we're going to live in it and renovate it, and we'll get much more in return than what we're buying it for, because it is just so incredibly marked down. And Eve's kind of apprehensive about it, but she goes along with it. And one day, like a month into them moving there, she gets a knock at the door when she's home alone. And instead of pretending like she's not home, she opens the door and she sees this family. And the father of the family is like, oh, hey, by the way, I used to live here when I was younger, and we're moving out of state, and I just wanted to show my wife and my kids around this home. Would you let us in? And Eve is like, I'm a people pleaser. Let me call my girlfriend and see if she'll make up an excuse for me to say no. And so she calls Charlie, and Charlie's like, what is going on? Like, I don't know. And that's not enough to convince Eve to say no. She lets these strangers in the house. And after the strangers are in her home, she's like, oh, what the hell? Why did I let these people in my house? And once these people step foot, some very uncomfortable, very creepy things start happening. This book I kind of buddy read with some of my friends, and I had started off the book at night and I was very creeped out. There is this element of like articles and interviews that are spiced in between each chapter, and at the end of those articles that are input, there are these Morse codes that are on the bottom of the articles, but when you're listening to audio, you hear the beeps and stops of Morse code. And the first time I heard it, it scared the living hell out of me. I was frightened, and I ended up reading it during my work day with the sun up, and it still scared the shit out of me. I was like, oh my god. I never had that visceral of a reaction with a book, and We Used to Live Here did that and more. Reading it with other people and getting to theorize, and it being such an interactive book was something that made the story so much more fun, and I just really enjoyed it. Like, it wasn't a typical haunted house kind of thing that I was expecting. It really took this narrative and took it to a completely different place than what I was expecting, but the whole journey to where the ending was so fun and so dynamic for me. And I don't know, to be that frightened of a book, I have to give it its flowers and have it on my top 10 of this year. The next book that I have on my list is also a recommendation from my good friend Michele, and it is a novella, a fantasy novella, and it is The Lies of the Unjango. Basically, this follows this young boy Tutu who goes on a journey to find water for his city. The people in this city have been basically dying of dehydration, and they're all given like a very small, minute amount of water per year, and it's just barely enough to keep them alive. And Tutu, at the beginning of this book, is 12, and so he knows that by the time he turns 13, he is going to have his tongue cut off, because his city is to give the tongues of the citizens up for sacrifice in order for them to have the amount of water that they do. And he's like, please, I don't want my tongue to be cut off. I will go find water before I turn 13, and I will bring it back to our city in order to kind of save us all and not to have any younger citizens in this city to lose their ability of speech. And so we follow young Tutu as he goes out and journeys in seek of water. And this is very much a coming of age story. The way Moses writes this book and creates such a vast and interesting world within 80 pages really blew me away. Felt so well realized, and like, despite the length being short, I felt like I was in this world for such a long time, and the character arc that happens just within 80 pages was so well done. Like, I really thought that I had read a fantasy that was like 300 to 400 pages, and you are so enthralled with this young boy, like, coming into his own personality and finding that he has choices and free will outside of what his society expects of him. Such a dynamic coming of age story, and one that I highly suggest. It's such a quick read, but one I think you feel so well invested and well involved in. Book number 4 on this list is a heavy hitter for me, honestly. It was a book that I have been putting off since I got it and have been very, very nervous about reading. And that's not because I didn't think that I would love it, but it was because I knew that I would love it. But I was just afraid of the emotional devastation that was going to hit me. Book number 4 has to go to The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. So this book, we follow the Mitsuda family, and they live on the peninsula of Kaigen, hence them being the Sword of Kaigen. They are this very strong warrior family, and if any sign of invasion or enemy attack comes, all the enemies will be faced with the Sword of Kaigen, and that holds all of these great warriors of their clan. And this we follow 2 perspectives. Misaki, who is the wife of one of the sons of the Mitsuda family, and her son Mamoru. And Misaki, we are following her perspective as she's kind of settling in to this life as a housewife and being under this very misogynistic rule within her own household. And then with her son Mamoru, we're following this kind of coming of age story as he's being primed to be a warrior for the Mitsuda clan. I don't know, just the character work that Emma Wong had in this to read from the perspective of a mother kind of struggling with who she is as a person, but also how she is raising these young boys to be in this society. It was such an emotional read, but one where I was like, yeah, I was right that I knew that this would be a favorite read, but I also was right for putting it off because the emotional impact, I literally had to stop reading and like reread whatever chapter I had read, and just to confirm whether or not I had read the chapter correctly, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was such an amazing and emotional journey, and Misaki is that woman for me. She was just so dynamic of a character, and to see her struggle with dealing with these expectations that you have in a very patriarchal society, I just really respect and appreciate the way Emma Wong handled the narrative in this, and it definitely is one that I think about very often. It was such a beautiful read. After putting down that brick of a book, we are going to talk about my book number 3 of the year, which is definitely much lighter, but also is a blue book. After I show you the other books, I am wondering if a specific color is correlated with my favorites of this year. But that all aside, my book number 3 for my top 10 is going to be Chlorine by Jade Song. This book is one that I had read after reading Bloom, and this was me really getting into the thick of my horror genre read this year. And this we follow Ren, who is this young high school student who has joined the swimming team, and she is struggling a little bit as her father is kind of MIA. He went back to China to get work and like gain more financial means for the family, but that means that like he basically has abandoned her and her mother, and so she's kind of hitting puberty and going through all of these changes while there are deep familial changes in her life. In order to kind of cope with all of those, she starts becoming obsessed with swimming to the point where she starts like reading all these fiction books about mermaids and wanting to be a mermaid herself. And she has this intense obsession of her body, how her physicality will affect the way she swims. It's this deep descent into obsession for her. There is like this uncomfortable sort of relationship that happens from the perspective of her swim coach, and like just him being a very slimy type of character. But the way Jade Song wrote the struggles of this young high school girl was something that I so deeply related to. And at the heart of it, it definitely is like the horror of being a teenage girl and having to deal with the changes and trials and tribulations of not only your individual life at school, but like your familial life, and the sort of horror that manifests from being a young Asian queer girl trying to struggle with figuring out what your place in this world is when you're not sure if you're even allowed a place, if you aren't brilliant and exceptional. And this book really hit me on an emotional level, and it made me feel so seen in ways that I didn't think a horror could. And it was just so much of a, oh my gosh, this is horrific in a kind of body gore sense and like completely outlandish, but at the same time, it was horrific in a very human way. And I really appreciated the way Jade Song went about discussing the issues that come along with being a young girl growing up in the society. And I think she handled all the discussions really well. And the horrific scenes in this had my jaw on the floor. I literally had to pause the book and was like, what am I reading? It was so out of body, but it was such an impactful read for me. And I'm just so grateful that Jade Song wrote this book. It was so, so amazing. Book number 2 on this list is yet another horror book and yet another blue book. And that is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. This read, oh my gosh. I had read this book without anybody that I knew having read it before. So the thing is horror is a genre that I've really stepped into this year. But when I was reading the other horror books, I was like DMing other people like, oh, like, what are the really intense parts so that I can prepare myself? This one, I had nothing to prepare me. I went in with no knowledge of what happens in this. So we follow our main character, Jiwon, who's coming into college. And at the very beginning of the book, she finds out that her parents are getting a divorce. Her father has been having a relationship with another woman, and her mother is going through deep emotional distress. And so she is dealing with this loss and kind of shouldering this emotional burden that her mother is going through, while also kind of helping her younger sister cope with her father not coming home. And within this month of her mother, like, struggling with her grief, she starts cooking fish, and she tells Jiwon, like, oh, if you eat the eyes of the fish, it brings you luck. So Jiwon at the beginning is like, ew, that's disgusting. Like, I don't want to eat the eyes. And so her mother's like, oh, more luck for me that you're letting me eat these. And within a month, her mother ends up dating this white man who has blue eyes. Yeah. And Jiwon starts becoming obsessed with blue eyes. This book is just a very, very interesting depiction of female rage. Like, not only is our main character Jiwon struggling with being an emotional pillar for her family, but also her own grief with her father leaving her life. Like, he's not physically gone, but he's no longer really a mantle in her life anymore. And her going into college, being this Korean American woman and being fetishized by not only her classmates, but like also the man her mother is dating. And her rage manifests into this obsession with blue eyes. And the rage that she feels slowly brings her to a dark descent. And the dark descent was wild as hell. The first time she lets this obsession grip her was the most wild and visceral experience I had read. And the whole scene of her really letting this obsession take over her was so incredibly done. Like, I really was in the room with Jiwon when all of that was going down, it was so descriptive, so horrific, and had my jaw on the floor. I think the way that Monica Kim wrote this book, and like as an Asian American woman myself, seeing the fetishization and the rage that comes with like being viewed as this sort of doll and like this demure creature, and being seen as so unhuman to other specific people, was so well done. And I was like, these are experiences that I've had, not had the obsession Jiwon has had, but the very uncomfortable way other people view you in a very non-human way. I felt so seen in. And for this to be Monica Kim's debut, I was like, Monica, girl, when are you going to write another book? Because this is wild. It was just so visceral. And wow, it was just one of those books where I read it and I was just like, okay, I need everybody to pick this up, because some of the scenes in this, some of the scenes and the ending of this, I was just like, Monica, that was amazing. I never knew that a horror book could make me feel so, all the feelings the way that it made me feel. And like, for me to rave about it and for me to want other people to read it, I was like, I never knew that I would be so deep in my horror bag in 2024. And The Eyes of the Best Part is definitely one that was a highlight in my horror reading this year. And my number one book for 2024 is a book that I'm not entirely sure how to put into words. It was a book that started my entire channel, and also, oddly enough, is a blue-toned book. And the book of 2024, my number one book of this year, and my number one book, honestly, of all time, is Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. Get the tabs. I'm holding up this book and I don't even know what in the world to say about this. This is the 16th book in an entire series called Realm of the Elderlings, but this is the last book in the last trilogy called Fitz and the Fool. Basically, in the whole series, we follow Fitz at a very young age. I believe he's around 9 when we first meet him, and in this last book, he's around 60-ish, and we kind of follow him as the bastard son to the king in waiting, and he ends up being like dumped at the castle by his maternal grandfather, and he tells the king, who is Fitz's paternal grandfather, like, you have responsibility of this young bastard boy, like, I'm not going to take care of him. And the king, his grandfather, kind of decides his fate by basically forcing him to be an assassin for the royal family in order to like gain Fitz's loyalty, so that when he's older, he doesn't have any plans of usurping the throne. And we just follow this very deep character journey. There's a lot of discussion about loneliness, about who he is to other people in his life. Is he somebody that these people love and appreciate as a human, or is he just the tool to his family? And the deep relational connection that he has with our other character, the Fool, is just such a beautiful, dynamic journey. I had started Realm of the Elderlings in 2023 and finished off at the beginning of 2024 Assassin's Fate. This was one of the first books that I read this entire year, and it is a book that has impacted me so deeply. The way Robin Hobb writes about loneliness, writes about the depression of her characters, and for me, it never felt gratuitous. The consequences to everybody else's actions and his own felt real. Like, it was never something that I was like, this just feels out of left field. It felt very real and natural to the story. I don't think I have ever met a writer who has done character work the way Robin Hobb has. Getting to be on this journey with him and seeing the conclusion of his journey was such a bittersweet reading experience. And there is so many different things that I want to say about this book that I can't say about this book because it would completely spoil so much of the series. But like, there's so many beautiful moments in this last book, and the brilliant part about Robin is that she has picked up little seeds and inklings throughout the series that she wrote, and she brings that back into this last book, and she builds onto those, and it makes for this very full circle moment that makes the world just so much more dynamic and so much more well realized. And I really appreciated the things that she concluded and the things she kind of left up to our interpretation as her audience. And even like the dedication at the beginning of the book to Fitz and the Fool, my best friends for over 20 years. Like, Robin, are you serious? Oh my god. I cannot wait to reread this series and like really get to like dive deep into her character work and like notice all the little details that she brings back into this last one. It is one of those series that has ingrained itself so deeply into my heart as a reader, and like it is one of those books that I can very comfortably say is like my favorite of all time, no question. Robin Hobb, the woman that you are. I don't know if I want to fight you. I don't know if I want to hug you, but you solidified yourself in the Hall of Fame for me. Everyone, that is the last book of my top 10 for 2024. I can't wait to see what the reading year of 2025 has to bring. I am very optimistic about this coming reading year, and hopefully maybe 2025 is the year that I unlock a new genre. My gamble is on sci-fi because that is one that I want to dabble into more. But 2024 was definitely the year of horror reading for me. I can't believe that was something that I really was hooked onto as someone who is such a scaredy cat. I did not know that horror would be something that I clicked with and that I really enjoyed. And I think this year I've solidified a lot of things that I really enjoy in reading. And yeah, it was such a transformative year for me, 2024, both in my reading hobby and also in my personal life. And I can't wait to see what 2025 has to bring. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for being along for the ride and watching me yap about my favorite reads of 2024. In the comments, I would love for you to share your top 5, top 10, top anything of 2024. I am really interested in seeing the type of books that you love to read, and maybe if I've not read some of your favorites, I would love to try those out for myself. But if you don't have anything else to say, let's put a B emoji in the comments for Assassin's Fate. I thank you so much for watching this video. And if you've been here for the whole almost year that I've been making videos, thank you so much also for watching my first year of being on BookTube. I really appreciate it and all the support that you've given me. But with that, thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!